The folly of looking back in fleeing out of Sodom. Luke 17, verse 32. Remember Lot's wife. Christ is here foretelling of his coming in his kingdom in answer to the question which the Pharisees asked him, namely when the kingdom of God should come, and has evidently respect to two things in what he says of his coming, namely his coming at the destruction of Jerusalem and his coming to the general judgment at the end of the world. And he compares his coming at these times to God's coming in two remarkable judgments that were past, namely first that in the time of the flood, and as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. And nextly he compares it to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Likewise also as it was in the days of Lot. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven, and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. And then he subjoins directions to his people, how they should behave at the appearance of the signal of the approach of that day, referring especially to the destruction of Jerusalem. In that day, he which shall be upon the housetop and his stuff in the house, let him not come down to take it away, and he that is in the field, let him likewise not return back. That is, that they should make the uttermost haste to flee, and get them out of the city to the mountains, as Christ commands. Matthew 24, verse 15 to 18. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him which is in the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field turn back to take his clothes. Jerusalem was like Sodom, in that it was devoted to destruction, to divine wrath as that was, and indeed to a more terrible wrath than Sodom was. And therefore the like direction is given concerning flying out of it with the uttermost haste, and without looking behind them, as the angel gave to Lot when he bid him fly out of Sodom. Genesis 19, verse 17. Escape for thy life. And Christ, in the text, enforces his counsel by the instance of Lot's wife. He bids them remember her, and to take warning by her, who looked back as she was flying out of Sodom, and became a pillar of salt. If it be inquired why Christ gave this direction to his people, to fly out of Jerusalem in such exceeding haste at the first notice of the signal of her approaching destruction, I answer it seems to be because flying out of Jerusalem was a type of flying out of a state of sin. Escaping out of that unbelieving city typified an escape out of a state of unbelief, and therefore they were directed to fly without stopping to take anything out of their houses, to signify with what haste and greatness of concern we should fly out of a natural condition, that no respect to any worldly enjoyment should prevent or delay us one moment, and that we should fly to Jesus Christ, the refuge of souls, our strong rock and the mount of our defence, so as in flying to him we should in our hearts leave and forsake all earthly things. And this seems to be the chief reason also why Lot was directed to make such haste, and not to look behind, because his flying out of Sodom was designed on purpose to be a type of our flying from that state of sin and misery that we are naturally in. Doctrine: we ought not to look back when we are flying out of Sodom, and that for the following reasons. 1. Because Sodom is a city full of filthiness and abominations. 'Tis a filthy and abominable city. 'Tis full of these impurities that are worthy to be had in the uttermost abhorrence and detestation by all. The inhabitants of it are a polluted company. They are all under the power and dominion of hateful lusts. All their faculties and affections are polluted with these vile dispositions that are unworthy of the human nature, and do greatly debase it. and that are exceeding hateful to God, and do dreadfully increase his anger. There is every kind of spiritual abomination that abounds in it. In Sodom there is all filthiness that can be thought of. There is nothing so hateful and abominable, but that there is to be found, and there it abounds. Sodom is a city full of devils, and all unclean spirits. There they have their rendezvous, and there they have their dominion. There they and those that are like unto them do as it were sport, and wallow themselves in filthiness, as 'tis said of mythical Babylon. Revelation 18 verse 2. It is an habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Who would be of such a society? Who would not flee from such a city with the uttermost haste, and never look back upon it, and never have the least inclination of ever returning, or having anything to do there any more? Some in Sodom may seem to carry it with a fair face, and make a fair outward show, but if we could look into their hearts, they are every one altogether filthy and abominable. We ought to flee from such a city with the uttermost abhorrence of the place and society, with no desire to dwell any longer there, and never to discover the least inclination to return to it, but to get at the greatest possible distance from it, that we may in no wise be partakers in her abominations. 2. We ought not to look back when flying out of Sodom, because Sodom is a city appointed to destruction. The cry of the city hath reached up to heaven. The earth can't bear such a company, but she will unburden herself of them, and spew them out. God will not suffer such a city to stand. He will consume them. God is an holy God, and his nature is infinitely opposite to all such uncleanness as Sodom is full of. He will therefore be a consuming fire to it. The holiness of God will not suffer it to stand, and the majesty and justice requires that those that are the inhabitants of that city, that thus offend and provoke him, be destroyed. And God will surely destroy it. 'Tis the immutable and irreversible decree of God. He hath said, and he will do it. The decree is gone forth. And so hence, as there is a God, and as he is almighty, and able to fulfill his decrees and his threatenings, so surely will he destroy Sodom. Genesis 19, verse 12 to 14. And the men said unto Lot, Whatsoever thou hast in this city, bring them out of this place, for we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and said, Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. This city is an accursed city, 'tis destined to ruin. We therefore, as we would not be partakers of his curse, and would not be destroyed, should fly out of it, and not look behind us. Revelation 18 verse 4. Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. 3. We ought not to look back when flying out of Sodom, because the destruction that 'tis appointed to is exceeding dreadful. 'Tis appointed to utter destruction, to be wholly and entirely consumed. 'Tis appointed to suffer the wrath of the great God, which is to be poured down from God upon them like a fearful storm of fire and brimstone. This city is to be filled full of the wrath of God. Everyone that remains in it shall have the fire of God's wrath come down on his head, and into his soul. He shall be full of fire and full of the wrath of the Almighty. He shall be encompassed with fire without, and full of fire within his head and his heart. His bowels and all limbs shall be full of fire, and not a drop of water to cool him. And he shall have nowhere to flee for relief. Go where he will, there is the fire of divine wrath. His destruction and torment will be inevitable. He shall be destroyed without any pity. They shall cry aloud, but there will be none to help. There shall be none to regard their lamentations, or to afford relief. The decree is gone forth, and the days come, when Sodom shall burn as an oven, and all the inhabitants thereof shall be as smoke. As it was in the literal Sodom, the whole city was full of fire. In their houses was no safety, for they were all set on fire. And if they fled out into the streets, they also were full of fire. Fire continually came down out of heaven everywhere. It was a dismal time. What a cry was there then in that city, in every part of it! But there was none to help. They had nowhere to go, where they could hide their heads from fire, and they had none to pity or relieve them. If they fled to their friends, they could not help them. With what haste should we fly from a city appointed to such a destruction? And how should we fly without looking behind? How should it be our whole intent, and what we, with all our mind and might, be engaged upon to get at the greatest distance from a city in such circumstances? How far should we be from thinking anything of returning to a city that has such wrath hanging over it? For the destruction to which Sodom is appointed is an universal destruction. None that stay in Sodom shall escape. None will have the good luck to be in any by corner where the fire will not search them out. All sorts, old and young, great and small, shall be destroyed. There shall be no exception of any age, or any sex, or any condition, but all shall perish together. Genesis 19:24-25. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of those cities, and that which grew upon the ground. We therefore must not delay or look behind us, for there is no place of safety in Sodom, nor in all the plain in which Sodom is built. The mountain of safety is before us, and not behind us. 5. We ought not to look back when flying out of Sodom, because the destruction that Sodom is appointed to is an everlasting destruction. This is said of the literal Sodom, that they suffered the vengeance of eternal fire. Jude 7. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. That destruction that Sodom and Gomorrah suffered was an eternal destruction. Those cities were destroyed and never built since, and never capable to be built. For the land that they stood upon then sank, and has been ever since covered with the lake of Sodom, or Dead Sea, as it is called, the Salt Sea, as 'tis called in Scripture. This seems to be thus ordained on purpose, to be a type of the eternal destruction of ungodly men, and so that fire that they were destroyed by is called eternal fire, because it was so typically. It was a type of the eternal destruction of ungodly men, which may be what may be partly intended when it is said in that text in Jude that they were set forth for an example, or for a type and representation of the eternal fire in which all the ungodly are to be consumed. And Sodom has, in all ages since, been covered with a lake, which was first brought on with fire and brimstone, to be a type of that lake of fire and brimstone, on which ungodly men shall have their part forever and ever, that we read of Revelation 20 verse 15, and everywhere. We ought not therefore to look back when fleeing out of Sodom, seeing the destruction it is appointed to is eternal destruction. For this renders the destruction truly infinitely dreadful. 6. Sodom is a city appointed to swift and sudden destruction. The destruction is not only certain and inevitable and infinitely dreadful, but will come speedily. 2 Peter 3 verse 3. Their judgment lingereth not, and their damnation slumbereth not. And so Deuteronomy 32:35. The day of their calamity is at hand, and the things that shall come upon them make haste. The storm of wrath, the black cloud of divine vengeance, do now every moment hang over them, just ready to break forth and come down in a dreadful manner upon them. God hath already whet his sword, and bent his bow, and made ready his arrow in the string. Psalm 7 verse 12. Therefore we should make haste, and not look behind us, For if we linger and stop to look back and don't fly for our lives, there is danger that we shall be involved in the common ruin. The destruction of Sodom is not only swift, but will come suddenly and unexpectedly. It seems to have been a fair morning in Sodom that morning that it was destroyed. There is notice taken of the time when the sun rose that morning, Genesis 19 verse 23. There seems to have been no clouds to be seen, no appearance of any storm at all, much less a storm of fire and brimstone, and the inhabitants of Sodom expected no such thing. And when Lot told his sons-in-law of it, they would not believe it, Genesis 19 verse 14. They were making merry, their hearts were at ease, they thought nothing of such a calamity at hand. But it came upon them at once, as pain on a woman of a child, and there was no escaping, as 'tis observed in the context, in the 28th and 29th verses of the 17th chapter of Luke. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven, and destroyed them all. So it is with wicked men. Psalm 73 verse 19. How are they brought into desolation as in a moment? They are utterly consumed with terrors. If we therefore linger and look back, we may be suddenly overtaken and seized with destruction. 7. There is nothing in Sodom worth looking back upon, because all the enjoyments of Sodom will soon perish in the common destruction. All will be burnt up. 'Tis not worth the while to look back on things that are perishing and consuming in the flames, as 'tis with all the enjoyments of sin. They are all appointed to the fire, and therefore 'tis foolish for any one that is fleeing out of Sodom to hanker any more after them. For when they are burnt up, then what good will they do? And it is worth the while for us to return back for the sake of a moment's enjoyment of them before they are burnt, and so expose ourselves to be burnt with them. Lot's wife looked back, because she remembered the pleasant things that she left in Sodom. She hated to leave them. She hankered after them. She could not but look back with a wishful eye upon the city where she had lived in such ease and pleasure. Sodom was a place of great outward plenty. They eat the fat and drank the sweet there. The land where Sodom was built was exceeding fruitful. It is said to be as the garden of God, Genesis 13 verse 10, and fullness of bread was one of the sins of the place, Ezekiel 16 verse 49. Here Lot and his wife lived plentifully, and it was a place where the inhabitants wallowed in carnal pleasure and delight. But let it abound now so much with these things. What were they worth now when the city was burning? Lot's wife was very foolish to linger for the sake of things that were all on fire. Sodom's enjoyments, the profits and pleasures of sin, they have the wrath and curse of God in them. Brimstone is scattered on them. Hellfire is ready to kindle on them. 'Tis therefore not worth the while for any person to look back after such things. 8. We are warned by messengers sent to us from God to make haste in our flying from Sodom, and not to look behind us. God sends his ministers, the angels of the churches, on this errand to us, as he sent the angels to warn Lot and his wife to fly for their lives, and said, as we have account in the 19th of Genesis, 15th and 16th verses, And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy 2 daughters, which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. And while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his 2 daughters. The Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth, and set him without the city. After we have had such forewarning, if we delay or look back after this, we shall be exceeding inexcusable and monstrously foolish.
Application. The use that I would make of the doctrine is of warning to those that are endeavouring to flee out of a natural condition, not by any means to look back. While you are out of Christ, you are in Sodom. The whole history of the destruction of Sodom, with all its circumstances, seemed to be inserted in the sacred history for our warning, and is set forth for an example. How the Apostle Jude says it lively typifies the case of natural man, the destruction of those that continue in a natural condition, and the manner of their escape who fly to Christ. The psalmist, when speaking of the appointed punishment of ungodly men, seems evidently to refer to the destruction of Sodom in Psalm 11 verse 6. Upon the wicked he shall rain snares, fire and brimstone, and an horrible tempest. This shall be the portion of their cup. Consider therefore what the state and condition is that you are attempting to get out of. You that are seeking an interest in Christ, you are fleeing out of Sodom. Sodom is the place of your nativity, and that is the place where you have spent your life. You are a citizen of that city that is so full of filthiness and abomination before God, that polluted, accursed city. You belong to that impure society. You don't only live among them, but you are one of them. You are one that have those abominations, and have so provoked God. 'Tis you that I have been all this while speaking of under this doctrine. You are the inhabitants of Sodom. Perhaps you may look on your circumstances as not very dreadful, but you dwell in Sodom, though you may be reformed and appear with a clean outside and a smooth face to the world. Yet as long as you are in a natural condition, you are an impure inhabitant of Sodom. The world of mankind is divided into two companies, and as it were into two cities. There is the city of Zion, the church of God, the holy and beloved city, and there is Sodom, that polluted and accursed city that is appointed to destruction. You belong to the latter of these. How much soever better you may look on yourself than some others, yet you are of the same city, the same company of fornicators, drunkards and adulterers, and common swearers, and highwaymen, and pirates, and sodomites. How much soever you may think yourself distinguished, you, as long as out of Christ, do belong to the very same society. You are one of the same company. You join with them, and are no better than they any otherwise than as you may have greater restraints. You are looked upon in the sight of God as fit to be ranked with them. You and they are altogether the objects of the loathing and abhorrence of God, and have the wrath of God abiding in you, and will go with them and be destroyed with them if you don't flee. Yea, you are of the same society, the same company with the devils. For Sodom is not only the city of wicked men, but 'tis a hold of every foul spirit. You belong to that city that is appointed to such awful, inevitable, and universal swift and sudden destruction, that has a storm of fire and wrath hanging over it. Many of you are making some attempts to flee in out of Sodom, or rather to get out, for some of you go with so slow a pace that it can hardly be called fleeing. Let those that have set out be warned by what has been said to escape for their lives, and not to look back. Look not back unless you have a mind to have a share in the burning tempest that is coming down in that city. Don't look back in remembrance of the enjoyments you had in Sodom, as hankering after the pleasant things you had there, after the ease, the security, and the pleasure that you had there. Remember Lot's wife, for she looked back as being loath utterly and forever to leave the ease and pleasure and plenty that she had in Sodom, and having a mind to return to them again. Remember how she came off, and remember the children of Israel in the wilderness, who had a mind to go back again into Egypt, because they remembered them. Numbers 11 verse 5. We remember the fish we did eat in Egypt freely, the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks, and the onions and the garlic. Remember what was the issue of their hankering. You must be willing forever to leave all the ease and pleasures and profits of sin, to forsake all for salvation, as Lot forsook all, and left all he had to escape out of Sodom. Here consider several things. First, the destruction you are in danger of is infinitely more dreadful than that destruction of the life at Sodom that Lot fled from. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in a storm of fire and brimstone was but a shadow of the destruction of ungodly men in hell, and is no more to it than a shadow or a picture is to a reality, or as painted fire to real fire. The misery of hell is set forth by various shadows and images in Scripture: blackness of darkness, a never-dying worm, furnace of fire, lake of fire and brimstone, the torments in the valley of the son of Hinnom, a storm of fire and brimstone. The reason why so many similitudes are made use of is because none of them are sufficient. One does but partly and very imperfectly represent, and therefore God makes use of many. You had therefore much more need to make haste in your escape, and not to look behind you, than Lot and his wife had when they fled out of Sodom. For you are every day and every morning in danger of 1,000 times more dreadful storm coming on your head than that which came on Sodom, when the Lord rained brimstone and fire out of heaven upon them, so that it will be vastly more foolish on you to look back. Second, the destruction you are in danger of is not only greater than the temporal destruction of Sodom, but greater than the eternal destruction of the inhabitants of Sodom. For how well soever you may think you have behaved yourself, you that have continued impenitent under the glorious gospel have sinned more and provoked God far more, and have greater guilt upon you than the inhabitants of Sodom, though you may seem to yourself, and it may be to others, as a very harmless creature. Matthew 10, verse 15. It shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. Third, multitudes, while they have been looking back, have suddenly been overtaken and seized with the storm of wrath. The wrath of God has not delayed while they have delayed. It has not waited at all for them to repent and turn about and fly against, but has probably seized them, and they have been past hope. Lot's wife, when she looked back, she was immediately destroyed. God had exercised patience towards her before. When she lingered at the setting out, the angels pressed her and her husband and children to make haste. And not only so, but only so. But when they delayed notwithstanding, they laid hold on her hand, and brought them forth, and set them without the city, the Lord being merciful to her. But now, when notwithstanding this mercy and the warnings had been given for, she looked back, God exercised no more patience towards her, but proceeded in wrath and immediately put an end to her. And God has in like manner been merciful to you. You in times past have been lingering. You have been warned by the angel, told of your danger, and pressed to make haste and fly out. Yet you delayed, and now at length God has, as it were, laid hold on you by the convictions of his Spirit to draw you out of Sodom. And therefore remember Lot's wife. If you now, after all, should look back, after God has been so merciful to you, you will have reason to fear, lest God should suddenly destroy you and wait no longer on you. Multitudes, when they have been looking back and putting off to another opportunity, they have never had another opportunity. They have suddenly been destroyed, and that without remedy. Fourth, if you should look back and live long after it, there will be a great danger that you will never get any further. The only way to seek salvation is to press forward with all your might, and still to look and press forward, never to stand still or slacken your pace. When Lot's wife stopped in her flight and came to stand to look back, that was her punishment, that then she was to stand forever. She never got any further. She never got beyond that place, but there she stood, a pillar of salt, a durable pillar and monument of wrath for her folly and wickedness. So it very often is with backsliders. Though they may live a considerable time after, when they look back, after they have been taking pains for their salvation, they lose all. They put themselves under vast disadvantages. They, by quenching the Spirit of God and losing conviction, dreadfully harden their own hearts and stupefy their souls. They make way for discouragement, and dreadfully strengthen and establish the interest of sin in their heart. And many ways give Satan great advantages to ruin them, and provoke God oftentimes utterly to leave them to hardness of heart. When they come to look back, their souls presently become dead, and hard like Lot's wife's body. And if this be the case, that though they live long after, they never get any further, 'tis worse for them than if they were immediately damned. When persons look back when flying out of Sodom, their last case is far worse than the first. Matthew 12:43-45. When the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he walketh through dry places, seeking rest, and findeth none. Then he saith, I will return into my house from whence I came out. And when he is come, he findeth it empty, swept and garnished. Then goeth he and taketh with him 7 other spirits, more wicked than himself, and they enter in and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. Even so shall it be also unto this wicked generation. And experience confirms that none ordinarily have so much difficulty as backsliders. 5th, it may well stir you up to fly for your life, and not to look behind you to consider so many lately have fled to the mountain, while you yet remain in Sodom. What multitudes has God given that wisdom to, that they have fled to Christ, the mountain of safety? They have fled to the true church, that little city Zor that God will spare and never destroy. How many have you seen of all sorts resorting out of Sodom thither, as believing the word of God by the angels, that God would surely destroy that place? They are in a safe condition. They are got out of the reach of the storm. The fire and brimstone can do them no hurt there. But you yet remain in that cursed city, among that accursed company. You are yet in Sodom, that God is going so terribly to destroy, where you are in danger every minute of having snares, fire, and brimstone come down on your head. Though so many have obtained, you have not obtained. Good has come, but you have seen none of it. Others are happy, but nobody knows what will become of you. You have no part, nor lot in that glorious salvation of souls that has lately been among us. The consideration of it should stir you up effectually to press forward, and still to press forward, and to resolve to press forward forever, let what will be in the way, and hearken to no temptation, and never look back, or in any way slacken or abate your endeavours, as long as you live, but if possible increase more and more. 6th, backsliding after such a time as this will have a vastly greater tendency to seal a man's damnation than it would have otherwise. The greater means persons have, the louder calls and the greater advantages they are under, the more dangerous is backsliding, the more it has a tendency to enhance guilt and provoke God and harden the heart. We in this land of light used to be under great advantages than the most of the world before, but the advantages persons are under now for their salvation are perhaps tenfold of what they were at such times as we were ordinarily under before, and backsliding will be proportionally the greater sin and the more dangerous to the soul. You have seen God's glory and his wonders amongst us in a most marvellous manner of late. If you therefore look back after this, there will be great danger that God will swear in his wrath that you shall never enter into his rest, as God swore concerning them that were for going back into Egypt, after they had seen the wonders God did for Israel. Numbers 14:22-23. Because all those men that have seen my glory and my miracles that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have tempted me now these 10 times, and have not hearkened to my voice, surely they shall not see the land which I swear unto their fathers, neither shall any of them that provoke me see it. The wonders that we have seen amongst us of late have been of a more glorious nature than those that the children of Israel saw in Egypt and in the wilderness. Seventh, we don't know but that the great part of the wicked world are in this day under Sodom's circumstances, when Lot fled out of it, namely in having some awful temporal destruction hanging over it. It looks as if some great thing was a-coming, and the state of things in the world seems to be ripe for some great revelation. The world has got to such a degree of wickedness that 'tis probable the cry of the wickedness has by this time reached up to heaven, and 'tis hardly probable that God will suffer things to go on as they are now much longer. 'Tis likely God will ere long appear in awful majesty, in vindicating his own cause, and then none will be safe that are out of Christ. Now everyone should fly for their lives, and escape to the mountain, lest they be consumed. We can't certainly tell what God is about to do, but this we may know, that they that are out of Christ will be in a most unsafe state. Eighth, and lastly, to enforce this warning against looking back, consider the exceeding proneness that is in the heart to it. The heart of man is a backsliding heart. There is in the heart a great love and hankering desire after the ease and pleasures and enjoyments of Sodom, as there was in Lot's wife, by which persons are continually liable to temptation to look back. The heart is so much towards Sodom that 'tis a difficult thing to keep the eye from turning there, and the feet from tending that way. When men under convictions are put upon fleeing, 'tis a mere force. 'Tis because God lays hold on their hands, as he did on Lot's and his wife's, and drags them out. But the tendency of the heart is to go back to Sodom again, and persons are very prone to backsliding through discouragement. They are yet to be discouraged. Their heart is unsteady, is soon tired, soon gives out, and is apt to listen to discouraging temptation to look back. A little difficulty and delay soon overcomes and tires out poor feeble hearts, and discouragement tends to backsliding. It weakens persons' hands, lies as a dead weight on their hearts, and makes them drag heavily. And if it long continues, it very often issues in security and senselessness. Convictions are often shaken off that way. They begin first to go off with discouragement, and backsliding is a disease that is exceeding secret in its way of working. 'Tis a flattering distemper. It works like a consumption, wherein persons oftentimes flatter themselves that they be not worse, but hope something better, and in a hopeful way to revive till a few days before they die. So backsliding commonly comes in gradually, and steals upon them insensibly, and they keep flattering themselves that they be not backslidden. They are seeking, yet they hope they have not lost their convictions, and by the time they find it out, and can't pretend so no longer, 'tis commonly gone so far that they don't much care if they have lost their convictions. And when it is come to that, 'tis commonly a gone case with persons as to those convictions. Thus they blind themselves, and keep themselves insensible of their disease, and so be not terrified with it, nor awaken to use means for relief till it is past cure. Thus it is that backsliding commonly comes upon persons that have not for some time been under any considerable convictions, and afterwards lose them. And let the consideration of this your danger excite you to the greatest care and diligence to keep your heart in watchfulness and prayerfulness against backsliding, and let it put you upon endeavours to strengthen your resolution of persevering and guarding against everything that tends to the contrary, that you may indeed hold out to the very end, for then shall you know, if you follow on, to know the Lord.